This evening, I am in Westfield, North Carolina, visiting with Jean M. Holcomb, who is the retired director of the King County Law Library, which is in Seattle, Washington, on the other side of the country.
Right.
Jean, I want to thank you for inviting me here to your lovely home here in the country. It's a wonderful setting, even though we're doing this in early December, so it's late fall. The trees no longer have leaves and so on, but I get a pretty good picture of the views around here,
Yes,
which are
too bad
spectacular.
it's dark.
And now it's dark, but I
Yes.
got here just before sunset, so I did get to see the area pretty well. Sort of to complete your introduction, I want to mention that you continue your work somewhat as a sort of your career as a retiree, as a consultant on law library business, and you've done that following your formal retirement, which was in 2005. It's our custom, Jean, to ask about you as a person as opposed to just a colleague. Not that they're any different, but you get the picture, I think.
Right.
And could you tell us a little bit about your life, not only perhaps today here in the foothills of the mountains in North Carolina, but
Right.
what it was like in your younger days
Sure.
as well.
Well, I grew up in North Dakota in the very far west corner of the state, in a little town called Kenmare, 1,500 people. You could probably walk from one end of town to the other in 30 minutes. The biggest town was Minot, about 50 miles away, and my grandparents and my aunts and uncles and cousins all lived there. My family on both sides, my mom and dad, their parents or grandparents came to North Dakota in territorial days, and before North Dakota was a state. My dad's family had a ranch, and it is still in the family. I visited with my dad several years ago, and he was much more forthcoming about the stories, and maybe because I was older, he thought I'd be more interested. But he talked about how they chose the land. There was a spring, and the buffalo would come to the spring, and the Indians had an encampment on the hill, and you could see where that encampment was because there were teepee rings. And a teepee ring is a circle of rocks that the Indians would use to hold the edge of their teepee down from the windstorm or the snowstorm. And my grandfather's father thought that if the Indians thought this was a good place to be, then it was a good place for them and their cattle. And during this visit, we went behind the barn and we saw an old car just sitting there.
Oh.
And in that part of the world, it's so dry. A piece of used farm equipment that has reached the end of its life is just going to be out on the prairie, so you can see generations of used farm
And I
equipment.
suppose it doesn't rust away, or
It-
at least
it
any too
doesn't.
quickly since
It
it's so
doesn't.
dry.
It doesn't, and so I think my dad had either not remembered that the car was there, but it was his dad's car, and it.
Do you have
I
a
wanna
picture of
I
it?
have a picture of it.
Hold it up. I will look at the back of the screen.
see?
Oh, it shows up well. Yeah.
This is a 1929 Model A Ford with a Murray body. And when we saw it in the barnyard, it did not look like this.
Well, that doesn't look like the 1931 Model A that one of my friends had in college, but he didn't have the fancy Murray body. He had just a regular body with the rumble seat in the back.
And one of the things that distinguished this vehicle at that time was that there was a sapling growing up through the engine, where the engine block was.
Oh.
And the key was in the ignition, and the title was in the glove box.
Didn't have to worry about thieves, I guess, back
I
there.
don't think so. And so my dad and my brother had a project, and they hired somebody to basically, get it into running condition. So it's now, the picture is taken at my niece's wedding. She arrived at the church in the vehicle, and my dad's 90th birthday, we drove up to the celebration. So It's fun to have the opportunity to hear those stories, and I'm assuming that although we aren't necessarily talking to a wider family, we're telling law library family stories.
Well, I
as
hope
well.
we see each other as family, and extended family as we are, as colleagues. I always felt that with go to meetings, and there are all these people that were such great friends.
Yes, exactly.
And the ones I hadn't met became great friends,
Yep.
usually before the meeting was over.
Exactly. A dance or a bottle of wine or something.
That helped too.
It did.
Yeah.
It did.
Well, I will also again mention that I'm glad that you are here in North Carolina instead of 50 miles from Minot, North Dakota,
Yes.
because this is December again,
Yes.
and we're doing this, and I would be loath to want to come there at this time of the year.
Yes.
There's something called blizzards and bad cold weather in that
That's
part of
right.
the country, whereas here it was really quite
It was
nice
a pretty
today.
day today. Yep.
Yeah.
Growing up, I had my first job at the beginning of junior high. Our next door neighbor was the school superintendent, and the school was all one, everybody, no kindergarten, but first grade through high school, all in one building. And our town did not have a library. The Minot, where my grandparents lived, did, and I had a library card there.
Yeah.
But the individual classrooms had small libraries, and then there was a room called the high school library. You weren't allowed to go there until you were in
You
high
had to
school.
be a high school
You
student.
had to be a high school student.
Discrimination.
But my neighbor hired me to unpack the new textbooks that came, to shelf read all the collections, and I was paid 50 cents an hour to do this. I did it from the summer starting before 7th grade all the way through high school. And he was very generous. He said, do you want to sit and read or take the books home? And I basically started at A and read my way. So I read all the American classics. They had Ibsen, it was just, I read a lot of things that probably kids of my age wouldn't have read. We didn't have television in that part of the world until I was in high school. And by then, you were busy doing other things, so reading was a big entertainment. But it was a great place to
Well, it
grow
sounds
up.
like you not only had this fabulous, high-paying 50-cent-an-hour job, but you had access to all these books.
That's right.
And you took advantage of it.
I
it
did
sounds
take
like.
advantage of
Yeah.
it. And then living, going off to school, and I don't think I ever gave a serious thought to going back to North Dakota. I thought there had to be places other than that kind of winter. And I enjoyed my time there, but I didn't have any interest in going back.
Well, I came here today from Michigan, which is not North Dakota, but it was still snowy and cold
Yep.
where I was in Michigan this last few days. And
We have bad weather here too. We have a week maybe where the tractor doesn't plow. Paul doesn't get out and plow the lane.
So the week is your winter, huh?
Yeah,
Yeah, or
Maybe
big,
once
big
or twice.
real winter.
yeah, not like 20 below or
Yeah.
40 below.
Well, you're actually sort of not only sort of in the rural area, but you have the mountains in
Yes.
the area too. So
Yes.
you must be fairly high country. then.
We're at 1,000 feet here.
Yeah, that's
So the climate is very different. Just my son and his family who live in Winston-Salem, we have totally different weather.
yeah. And then of course the coastal area would be different still.
Yes.
I should
Yeah.
imagine down, and that's a ways to the east of here.
It's about 4.5-hour drive from here.
Yeah. Well, that sounds interesting. So you grew up in North Dakota.
I did, and I went to school at the University of North Dakota.
Okay.
I had
Well, you have 3 degrees, as I
do.
recall.
I
I'm
do.
Looking at your bio,
Yeah.
you want to tell us about those at this point?
my undergraduate degree. I went off to the University of North Dakota with no real career path in mind. It was just understood. That's
You
what
and
you
everybody
did.
else at
You
that
just-
point in life,
you
pretty
just-
much.
You did. And I was very fortunate. Sometimes the grapevine, you hear stories from the people who've gone before you. And they said, now, if you're really lucky, you'll have Dr. Geiger for American history. And I was very lucky. And he was a charismatic teacher. and I'd always been fascinated by history. I read mostly nonfiction in that day and age, and he made history come alive.
Oh.
And I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to be a college history teacher. I want to tell stories about how people lived, what they ate, what they wore, not so much treaties but just how life
Almost
was.
an anthropologist type approach.
And that year they started a new program. I was one of the first enrollees in American Studies, and now it's a more common approach. But you took, American literature. I did take anthropology, and I had a double major. I took political science. I knew I couldn't pass the fourth year of French, no matter how hard I tried. So I had a double major, and I think I enjoyed college. I enjoyed being active in the political and social life, and I did one thing that was probably a little more unique than the average college student. At that time, they had a television program called College Bowl. It's sort of like, when $64 million question or $1,000 question, or those kinds of shows.
Sort of a competition
Yes,
with another college
It was.
team.
That's exactly what it was. And although we didn't, the Grand Forks station didn't get that show, and we had never seen the show. They had open auditioned, and I auditioned and was one of the 4 people on the team. And we practiced. They had model questions you could practice. But we went to New York City, and it was during Christmas vacation. So New York at Christmas was just spectacular. We had front row seats for a musical, and then we had the competition. And it's like watching Jeopardy now, where they all know the answers, but who can push the button faster?
Oh, is that how it works?
That's how it works.
Because one of our colleagues was on
I
Jeopardy
know, I
just
saw,
a few weeks ago.
I saw him.
Yeah.
Ken did a really
Ken
great job.
Hirsch. Yeah. And I talked to him on camera for one of these sessions between when he did that and when it came out. But he was sworn into secrecy, and I think they had him under 10 million contract terms too, or something.
Yeah, they're serious about that. So anyway, we were up against Bates College, which the way it worked, if you won 5 times in a row, you retired a trophy. Well, we were their 5th time, and they went home with the trophy.
Oh.
But we had a free trip to New York, and it was just a very.
It sounds like
it was fun.
Fabulous time, especially for a bunch of kids from
North Dakota.
From North Dakota in that era where you didn't travel and have that much TV even to see all this stuff.
Yeah. So that was
So the
fun.
program didn't come to the local station.
No, it did not.
What a shame.
And so I really never saw it. Which was kind of a weird sensation.
Maybe if you look at one of these cable
Archives
channels or something that has all the old shows, you'll find yourself on it.
And in modern times, I had a similar experience. My cousin's son was a contestant on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and I was his phone a friend, and I helped him win $500,000 because I knew the answer to the question.
Did he fork in you? Well, I won't ask you because the IRS might be asking you.
No, but he brought me a nice T-shirt and a bouquet of flowers.
That's good. Well, why not?
Yeah. So, yes, I went to the University of North Dakota for undergraduate, and then I went to graduate school. I was president of my sorority, and they had a fellowship program where they would pay for you to go to school. They would pay tuition, room and board, and 1 trip home if you would work with a chapter. And I went to Oklahoma State because they didn't have a chapter, and the alums at the other chapters in the state were very reluctant to have the Cal College have a chapter of their sorority. And so
that's what they considered that particular school.
Well, Oklahoma State, was not the University of Oklahoma. It was not the University of Tulsa. But I went and did that for a year. I was a graduate student in history, and I did all with two other undergraduates and another graduate student. So they really put the resources behind it, and I did all the organizing and helped the alums and did all the typical things. The second year, I was offered a graduate assistantship in the history department, so I taught Introduction to American History, and I loved that. And that was kind of what I thought it was going to be, but times and plans changed.
Yes, I know you got waylaid somewhere in that history curriculum
I
because
did.
you ended up in another field.
I did, and 20 years later, so I did a lot of things in between. I taught 8th grade in a private school. I taught 5th grade. I worked in I was a periodical clerk in an academic library. I did a lot of different things, but a big part of that time I was a stay-at-home mom. And after the youngest child was in kindergarten, I went back. We were living in North Carolina. I went to Meredith College, which is a women's college in Raleigh, and went for a year to get the courses I needed to be an elementary school teacher, because American Studies and Political Science is a non-teachable background to get a teaching certificate in North Carolina. So I did that, and then I taught school for 4 years, 5th grade, and enjoyed it and learned a lot, but I could see that it was not going to be something that I would want to do forever. And Paul kept saying, "Jean, you ought to go to law school. You'd really like going to law school." And people would not think that I'm a biddable person, but I did take the LSAT and did enroll at the University of Alabama. And then...
So you're back to law school about 20 years after...
I am, exactly 20 years.
Raising kids a bit. And,
Yep, they were all teenagers when I started.
Well, your next degree actually was the law degree, but you were also simultaneously in library school, were you not?
Yes. I went to law school thinking that this would be another way to get myself into college teaching without having to get a PhD and learn a foreign language, which I knew I couldn't do. I had a neighbor who had a law degree, and she was adjunct faculty at North Carolina State and taught business law.
Oh.
Well, I can find a subject law-related with a law degree. And because Paul was in higher education, we were going to be in college towns, there would be an opportunity.
Yeah.
So first semester...
Now, Paul is your husband.
Yes.
Yeah, we haven't introduced him. That's why I mentioned to the audience who this Paul is that sneaked in here.
Yeah. So my husband, Paul, who also has a law degree and a library degree.
That's right.
But first semester legal research, the law library director taught legal research, and she was a lovely person and a great librarian, but she hated being in front of the classroom. And I thought, oh man, I like to be in front of the class.
Have I got an offer for you, boss? Huh?
So, I thought, oh no, that's a really, they had that prior history with libraries off and on. Yeah, you worked
going back to your high school or your
junior high
days when you were getting access to the books that
That's
way.
Right.
And that princely sum of 50 cents an hour.
That's right. So I went to the reference librarian and I said, could you tell me a little bit about what this is like as a career path? And she did, and she gave me a copy of what is Spectrum now, but it was just a little more like a newsletter than a magazine.
Probably the president's newsletter, or maybe
some kind of,
it morphed into the ALL newsletter before it became
kind of
the more glossy.
Yes, it was definitely
publication
not a glossy,
we know today.
No, it was definitely not a glossy publication.
Yeah.
But I went over to the library school and I talked to them. The law school had a policy. I don't know how tightly they enforced it, but they didn't want law students having part-time jobs
Mhm.
and doing anything other than
That,
focusing.
that was the accreditation rules of the
Was
American
it?
Bar Association, although law schools tend to, especially when tuition started really soaring, to kind
Yeah.
of wink the other way a little bit on some of that.
Well, I went
But
to
the ABA wanted you to be a real full-time
Yeah.
law student and not working on the side and anything that was going to take you away from your
Yeah.
studies.
right. So I went to the library school and I said, I don't have a lot of time. I'm not a kid anymore. I want to get this done. Can we work so that I can go to law school during the regular semester and go to library school in the summers and at night if I need to? And they were just so kind of gobsmacked that anybody would think about doing that. I said, sure. So I marched into the dean's office and just said, I want you to know that I'm not telling anybody else. This is what I'm going to do. And so I did. I started in the summer between my first and second year of law school, and they had what they call a mini master. You could get a full semester credit in 3 weeks, and then 2 regular summer sessions. So I did that for 2 summers and went to library courses during the regular when it would fit around my class or at night. And the library school was very forgiving. They gave me 6 credit hours for like legal research and advanced legal research, which made sense.
Yeah.
And
So you didn't have to take everything.
I did not, and they didn't require a thesis, which
Uh-huh.
made it easier too.
Yeah.
Um,
Probably had to take a comprehensive exam, though.
Nope.
You didn't? Oh, that seemed to be the alternative to thesis-based master's degrees for a long time.
Yeah, I don't know, but if I don't remember taking my patent. I'm pretty
Oh, I
darn
think
sure
you would
if I-
remember it
I
if you
would if I
did.
had
One
to.
of those rites of passage,
Yeah.
like bar exams are
Yes.
in their own way.
And nothing like the program at the University of Washington where because my husband Paul was a reference librarian there,
Yeah.
and I went back 2 summers after I retired and taught the law library administration class. I know what those students have to do. And this was nothing like this.
Yeah, I saw that you were down on Penny's
Twice, yeah.
short list
I
of
did.
people that say yes
Yep, I do.
and can do it.
Yeah, well, I enjoyed doing it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I finished in the summer between my second and third year. In the second year in law school, the library director taught the class, but then they had student assistants who actually did everything except the main lecture. And so I did that in my second year of law school. And you could do it for pay or for credit, and I did it for credit.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third year I worked in the law, I was the morning reference librarian. I opened at 7 a.m., I think probably 6 days a week, and did that early morning shift as the reference librarian.
So much for the Fair Labor Standards
All
Act
right.
hours.
But
I guess you can work 6 days a week. You have to do a weekend in there, I think.
yeah, well, and maybe, I think there was a day off somewhere in
Yeah,
there.
it'd be about a day and a
But
half.
I was
finally
part-time.
break your week.
Yeah, I was it wasn't a full-time job, it was just
Yeah.
a part-time job.
Uh-huh.
But they were going to pay me clerk's wages, and I said, no, I have a master's degree. That was one of the first times I kind of stood up for myself on this salary thing.
Mm-hmm.
Still wasn't fabulous, but
Now, so you end up with 3 degrees. You start off years earlier in history thinking, gee, I'd like to be a professor of history or something. And then you go through the family timeout, shall we say,
Yes.
from academics, and you're back in school. Can I ask you, you mentioned that a reference librarian where you were working had some influence in
Yeah.
this, or you asked her, but is there anybody who did play a role in influencing you to become a law librarian, and anybody in particular?
not to become a law librarian, not to get enrolled. That was pretty much an initiative of my own, and my husband was very supportive. He was also in library school because the library school was the first place that had, at that early 80s, had used database management. And
Oh.
he went to library school to learn how to do that, and so finally they told him.
Well, he had his law degree at that point.
He
I
did.
believe you said.
Yeah,
We had a conversation
At
at dinner tonight, and I think
Yeah.
Paul said that he had actually had the law degree, but he had then gone into development work
Yes.
for a college,
Yes.
fundraising and that
Yeah.
sort of thing. So
Yeah.
this was connection with that, I believe
Yeah.
he said, that
Yeah.
he wanted to.
They finally told him he couldn't just register anymore. He had to sign up. So he did library school on the 7-year plan, and I did it. in a
So you
speedy
both
way.
end up with both law degrees and
And
library degrees. Okay.
Yep. And we both end up as law librarians, but I think it's one of those serendipitous things that neither of us had ever
It doesn't sound
planned.
like you went about it from day
No.
one plotting it
Nope,
this way.
nope, and
Yeah.
both thoroughly enjoyed doing it.
Yeah. A follow-up question to how you became a law librarian is, did you have anybody in your early part of your career, or even more recently, that you would consider to be a mentor, or perhaps more than one?
Well, I think a big part of what I learned on the job, I learned from Virginia Hare, who was the public service librarian at the law school in Alabama. She was just very practical and no nonsense, and always ready to, give me a word or steer me. And I knew I could ask a question, and there was comfort, and we were great friends. She left after I'll go back a step. I graduated from law school on Saturday and started at the University of Alabama as a reference librarian on Monday. And they gave me 2 weeks off to study for the bar exam.
Probably all you needed.
Oh, sure. But made it through.
Well, see, it was all you needed.
Yes, well,
I'll bet you didn't know that yet.
no,
At that point.
but when the number one person, you're sitting in the bar exam and it's alphabetical, and when the number one person in the class is sitting next to you and he is sweating bullets, I did have a moment of thought where I thought, gee, maybe I should have worried about this a little bit more.
Oh, well.
But all I have to do is pass. You don't get an A or a B. You just have
That's
to
right.
pass, and I pass.
Well, that's the important
It
thing.
is the important
In fact, in some bars, you don't even know your exact grade, unless it's either pass or fail. But
Yeah.
if you fail, then you can go in and read the paper and see where you were deficient.
I think they told us our multi-state
Yeah.
what the score
But
was in that.
maybe they had to do that. But I know when I took the bar, I didn't want to know how I did
Yeah.
other than pass. I
Yeah.
didn't want to go in and talk to them because only the people that failed got that opportunity.
Yes.
Oh, well.
But anyway, so Virginia Hare was a big influence. And then when I left Alabama and we moved to Norfolk, Virginia,
Mm-hmm.
to the Norfolk Law Library, it was one of these instances where I just arrived in the community at least what I thought was the right time for me. There were 3 job openings for law librarians. Regent University had a position. One of the large Richmond law firms had part-time, they called it a law librarian position, and the other half-time you were the receptionist. And the County Bar Association had a proprietary library, and they just couldn't keep it up anymore. So they were in the process of creating a foundation. They would gift the collection to the foundation, and they had an agreement with the city of Norfolk to start collecting the statutory allowed share of the filing fee, and the library would be open to the public. So they hired me, and I went to the office where the library was on the floor of a bank tower, and the bar exec had an office. The librarian space was a room smaller than this with a sink, and it was where the materials came in. And my predecessor managing the collection had taken yellow legal pads, and every piece of material that came in was written in very beautiful penmanship, and there were years of these yellow legal pads.
Sort of an acquisitions or accessions list or
Maybe.
something? Yeah. Those used to be common in libraries, many libraries.
Yeah.
But long before either you or I were part of this field.
And the collection, the plans were made with an agreement with the city. They were going to move into better space, and the Dominion Tower was being built, nearly finished, on the harbor, beautiful space, and the library was to be on the 13th floor. And probably my second week there, I was meeting with the chairman of the library board and the bar director and the president of the bar association. I just asked, so the floor has been supported sufficiently in the building to support the collection? And everybody's eyes got really big.
What do you mean?
So,
books aren't that heavy, are they? I
So-
picked one up, it isn't that heavy.
So we were a year late in moving in while negotiations
Well, at least you
went on.
stayed on that floor. You didn't fall through, did you?
No, but they had to go in and structurally reinforce the floor before we could move. But we did move in, and it was a beautiful space. We had able to have copiers for the public and a public access Westlaw terminal. So it was a big step up, and we worked really hard to get the word out to the public. And the bar continued to make an annual contribution, and the bar members used the library.
So you were at the county library in Norfolk for about 5 years?
Yes.
And you'd been at your previous job at Alabama for 2, I think.
Yes.
I mean, after you became
Right, when I was a real
an
librarian.
official librarian,
Yeah.
as opposed to probably a real one, but as a student.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So we were in Norfolk for 5 years.
Yeah.
And
that's when you decided you'd relocate to a different part of the country or something
there's
along the way.
Yeah, and there's a really interesting story in how that all came to
Well, please tell us.
I had been the VAL, the Virginia Association of Law Libraries chapter president, and the year after I was president, I was chair of the Council of Chapter Presidents, and as such, I would go to the board meetings in Chicago, and Carolyn Ahern was the president at that time. Just in one of these kind of casual conversations going on, Penny Hazelton, Shirley David, and Judy Meadows. And Penny was talking about what a sorry state of things at the King County Law Library, and the board had tried to find a director and hadn't been able to find one. They were going to reopen the search, and did anybody know anybody that would be willing to take this job? It was a real fixer-upper. And Judy Meadows just said, "Oh, Jean will do that."
Now, one of your predecessors had been there quite a while,
There
Jim
were
McCardle,
two,
but there was
yes.
somebody in between, wasn't there? Or at least a couple in between?
Well, McCardle and the original director, between the two of them, they'd been there for almost 70 years, these two gentlemen. And when the search failed, one of the library staff, the existing staff, was acting director for a year. But he was not chosen to be the permanent director.
It wasn't his thing, it sounds like.
No, he wasn't chosen to be the director.
All right, we said the same thing.
And but I just went back to the hotel that night and called Paul and said, "What do you think about moving to Seattle?"
Oh,
And growing up in North Dakota, Seattle was kind of a mythical place. In hard times, like the Depression, when it was just dirt and nothing else, people moved off the farms, out of the small towns, and went to Seattle and got jobs in the shipyards in the run up to World War II, and then after the war in the aircraft carrier. And I can remember as a child being in a room and someone would talk about Seattle, and the room would just get quiet. I mean, it was in my mind, at least, always thinking that Seattle was such a special place. So
well, those of us that live out in that general area today
Think
hope it
that's
is
true.
still.
Yeah.
now it isn't necessarily Boeing that you'd work for, and I think the shipyards are pretty well closed.
But the technology, yeah.
But now it's Microsoft and Amazon,
Yep.
places like that. So they're still doing pretty well.
So anyway, we packed up and moved across the country. And when I went for the interview, and this was 1992, the library did not have a computer.
Well, they hadn't modernized at all.
No.
Well, that was pretty late for that.
Yes,
I mean, if
it
it was 1982, maybe, but...
Yeah, 1992.
Yeah.
And they assured me that there would be a computer on my desk, and there was, but for quite a while, it was that first year just beginning to make all the changes to modernize the operation.
Yeah. So that's where you completed your career. So you were there
13 years.
13 years.
Yeah.
And then you moved from there back to this
Back,
end of the
yes,
country
did.
again. And came full circle back. Well, you're not quite in Virginia, but at least
No,
you had some
close.
North Carolina.
And I had lived in North
Yeah, you'd
Carolina
lived here
before,
as well.
so, and we had all of our kids were on the East Coast, so we knew, and grandkids, so we knew eventually we'd be coming back.
Yeah. Well, it's a nice part of the country.
It is.
And, you know, Seattle is a benign climate, but some people do have some problems in the rainy season, which starts in the fall and runs well into the late spring sometimes.
One of the things I did before I went for the interview was to go to the local library in Norfolk and look at an almanac. And I looked at, rainfall. Okay, well, it's pretty much like Norfolk. What I didn't realize is it's in the air all the time. And I also...
Norfolk, you get the rain all in a few really heavy
Exactly.
storms. In Seattle, you get it all
Every day.
spread out and drizzle.
Yep. The short days in the winter were hard for me.
Yeah. I noticed that on this trip I'm on right now. I started actually in San Diego the other day to do some interviews, which is, shall we say, a bit south of Seattle.
Yes.
And it was about another hour of daylight in the afternoon
Yeah.
down there, and this is getting December, so... now, of course, there's payback time in June, and then
Yes,
it's
summer.
the other way around.
Summer is wonderful,
Yeah.
but the rest of the time. But I really found the time in Seattle to be very rewarding.
Yeah.
I mean, it dawned on me that so much of my career, where I really enjoyed myself, were the startup things. Going to help start the sorority. The elementary school that I was in was a brand new school. No traditions, no anything, so it was a clean slate. And in many respects, certainly the Norfolk situation was, but King County was too, because really, you could just say, this is day one, and this is what we want to be, and create a totally different kind of organization with a different perspective about client services, involvement in the community.
Times are really changing for law libraries as they have been again more recently, but back in the early 90s, I mean, the focus on service was becoming much more a goal.
Yes.
And it sounds like you had that at the County Law Library.
Right. Well, and just that I was fortunate in Norfolk to see an announcement. The annual meeting was in Atlanta, my first summer there, and there was a group called the Membership Subscription Law Library Roundtable. They were meeting, and they invited anybody from a similar library to go. So I signed up and went. And the people that I met there, the Social Law Library, Edgar Belfontaine and Maria Sekula, Regina Smith at Jenkins, Anne Brand and Hennepin. These were the people who I could aspire to have my library be.
Yeah.
And one of the first things we did in Seattle was the statute said we had to be open and circulate, but they didn't say that you couldn't charge for a circulation privilege. So we created a subscription program, and it could demonstrate to the county that we were generating revenue on our own. and also gave us some money to have better technology and better collection. But these people, Anne Grand in particular, was very generous. Her library was, where I thought I wanted to be, and I visited with one of my trustees, and they thought, yes, this is the kind of entity that we think we can be.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting you were able to do that and pull it off, apparently, because I remember the University of Washington, which is not downtown by any matter of means, but it's not that far away,
Yeah.
had a lot of the same kind of services for members of the bar. And they would, mail stuff to them. And of course, in the days of photocopiers, that expanded to that. So you sort of had some competition in town, but it sounds like you had a niche you filled.
Yeah, and we did photocopy and fax too.
But your location being
we're
in the middle of downtown on the courthouse,
and the courthouse on the same floor with the clerk's office.
Yes.
So that synergy, not only for the legal profession, the prosecuting attorney's office was on the floor below us. So basically, we provide their library services. Yeah. And for the citizen user, as we got more technology, and Washington, they were in the forefront on making plain English forms for all the domestic issues and a lot of other ones. So someone could come into the library and they could use us because we got a grant. We made a proposal to the Gates Foundation. They didn't consider law libraries as public libraries for their public library technology program, but they had a community access to technology program. So we made a grant proposal to them and were funded and created a technology center in the library with computers so that people could come in and do research and complete their forms. We could do training in the library. We got an LSTA grant to make our collection available online. We participated in the virtual reference project that the state library did. They surveyed all of their libraries to find out if there was an interest in having a virtual reference service. And so we partnered with the state law library and we're one of their resources and did virtual reference.
Now, out in the state of Washington, are there other county law libraries? Because I don't, even though I now live out there and I grew up out there years ago, I always have known about King County, and of course the state law library in Olympia, but I don't know about others.
And that was one of the cool things for me, to be involved with other county law libraries. And we met a couple times a year, and we're very active in lobbying to try to get our share of the filing fee increased and to work with partners like the Bar Association and other entities and we spent probably 6 or 7 years going to Olympia. And my last year there, we did get the filing fee was increased, and the library's share of the filing fee was increased.
Well, I imagine your library in King County, which is Seattle is in there, is the most active and most heavily populated county, with probably the most litigation on filing fees. Any of the others in the state. And
I think the prosecuting attorney's office is maybe the second largest law firm if you think of it in those terms.
Yeah, I know they have branches other than just in downtown Seattle.
Yes, one of the projects we were involved with, the county was building. They needed more jail space, and to make it acceptable to the community where they were siting it, they put a courthouse on the front of the jail. And we lobbied to have a branch of the library in that courthouse.
Is that the one out in Kent?
Yes.
South of Seattle?
Yeah. It's a beautiful building, public art. It was an amazing project to be involved. We called ourselves the Tenants Union, but there was one representative from every entity that was going to be in that courthouse. And we were literally making decisions about with the architects about how the building would be designed. I learned a lot.
You knew the floor had to be certain load
They
bearing
put
capability. You
us
them
on
up,
the bottom.
got that into the system early. I'm
But
sure.
also about how the shelves line up with the sprinklers and all that kind of stuff. So yes,
An experienced librarian,
I
if
knew
there was
about
one.
that.
Yeah.
And that was another problem in Norfolk. We had the last minute, the shelves had to be redesigned because they were interfering with the sprinkler heads. But one of the real, I think probably the thing that I'm proud of what the library did, and it wasn't all just me. I had an amazing staff and a very involved board of trustees. I convinced them we had enough going on that they needed to meet twice a month, and they did. And then I had to make sure there was something for them to decide. But I'll tell you a story about the chairman of my library board, Jim Brewer, who is still on the board. All these years later, he hired me, and he's the county counsel's legal counsel. And we made an annual trip up the street to the County Bar Association to give a report of the state of the library, because we were always asking for their help to support us in budget battles and other things. And I was standing outside waiting for Jim so we could and somebody else said, "Jean, what are you doing standing out here?" I said, "Oh, I'm waiting for my boss." And right behind me comes, he said, "I'm not your boss." And I thought, now, is that a good thing? I think probably it's a good thing. But it was definitely, in my mind, managing always from the middle.
But better to refer to him as your boss and have your correction made rather than not your boss and have it corrected.
Yes. But I just told them their job was to say yes. And my job was to convince them that saying yes was the right thing to do.
Well, that's right. And they were the boss.
Yeah, they were.
You had them trained.
Well, it worked well. But
that's great.
One of the really exciting things to be in Washington, in the legal community at that time, was Washington had a very active access to justice board and access to justice movement. And all of the partners, whether it was the clerks, the judges, the prosecutors, the Bar Association, the translators, the Child Protective Services, everybody came together and served on committees and had an annual meeting. And I was sitting in a committee meeting, and I don't remember the name of the committee, but they laugh at me. I'm always saying, "I have an idea." And I had an idea. I'd been involved in an effort in the clerk's office when they were starting to scan their court records, and I was included because I knew about information and technology. And so I was sitting in a meeting, and they were talking about digital filing. And so I said, "Well, what about the non-lawyers? How are they going to survive a race to the courthouse?" And everybody sort of, just looked, and I said, we need a technology bill of rights for the justice community. Just came out of my head. And everybody said, "Oh, now that sounds like a good idea. How are we going to make it happen?" And I said, "Well, let me see if I can outline how this will happen." And this started about 1999. So they said, "Write an article. We'll put it in the State Bar News and talk about the digital divide and technology and the impact on everyone who uses the justice system, and say we're starting to think about creating this technology bill of rights. Is anyone interested?" One person responded, but sometimes you only need one if it's the right person.
If it's the right person. Yeah.
And this retired attorney, who had also been a judge, named Don Horowitz, responded.
Oh, I remember that name when I was a kid growing up, that name.
Yeah. And
he was an attorney at that time.
Yes.
And it wasn't yet on the bench.
Yes, he'd come to Washington to clerk for the Supreme Court. He had a clerkship, I guess, and liked it and stayed. And his son was one of these tech millionaires. And so Don knew everyone and was tireless. And we spearheaded this project, and the bar spent a lot of time, and they actually had an access to justice coordinator. We had conferences. We had Richard Zorza, who was a consultant in public access, came and helped, and one of my trustees worked in drafting, and a document was created that outlines what the core principles were, and it took a lot of years and a lot of politicking to convince both the office of the administrator of the court and then the Supreme Court. But in December of 2004, the Supreme Court issued an order, and it's called the term Bill of Rights made people nervous, so it's called the Access to Justice Technology Principles. But then it flowed into court rules as a result. And I was doing my homework for this interview, and I couldn't remember Don's last name, and I was, I could have drawn a picture of him, but I couldn't remember it. So in looking for this, I came across, probably in 2004, the law school had done a symposium, and they had a lot of technology gurus and people who came and talked. Well, they redid it this past September, and still, working to make sure that technology is empowering and not disenfranchising.
Yes.
So that was one of my,
one of your
it's not anything
contributions to the fame of the system.
Yeah, right. That's not anything probably that anybody knows about other than me and the people I work with, but I felt good about being able to use the
Well, it sounds like
skills.
it was successful and an idea whose time
was
had come, definitely.
It was there.
Yeah. Well, Jean, you've been involved in a lot of things professionally other than just within your library and the local bar association segment. You've already mentioned that you were president of the Virginia Association of Law Libraries a while back when you were in Norfolk, and you became involved in AELL's chapter of chapter presidents
the
Council of Chapter Presidents. You've been involved as chair of the state court and county law library special interest section at one point, and some government library special interest section. I'm just looking at some of the notes I have here for me. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of that kind of work and perhaps why you did it, why you considered it important?
Yeah.
Some people, their day job's all they have time for, but you made time for
I thought it was
things.
my day job.
Well, all right.
And because I did it because I learned so much from the people that I was involved with. I loved the collaborative process. I have a lot of ideas. I mean, it's just how my mind works.
Yeah.
And so it was a way to be an advocate for the things that I cared about, and get people sort of on my side. And it was also just such a great way to meet interesting people. And I have lifelong friends. There's a group of us that when I was retired, I thought, I don't want to be isolated out here in the middle of nowhere. And I convinced, 5 of my closest friends that we ought to go to the beach every year. And we rented the same.
So they come on through here on your way to the Atlantic,
They do. And we go and read books and drink wine and walk on the beach, and it's a kind of a renew your soul sort of experience. But I've traveled, all over with other groups of law librarians and their spouses. Yes, we're neat people.
Yeah. Well, in a way, that's maybe a segue into a question that we had skipped earlier. I had just sort of passed on. We had moved into another subject, and that is what you do to occupy your time now that you've got time besides all this.
Yeah.
Do you have any particular hobbies, special passions, other pursuits of that sort you'd like to mention?
I worried about that because I been so totally involved in what I did in the profession.
And here you're getting ready to retire.
And
You can drop off the end of the earth and nothing to do.
well, I mean, I can read all day, but you know that might get old. I'm not sure, but I didn't have any plans, and I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't just rush out and do something, that I wouldn't do anything for 6 months. Well, it turned out we'd originally thought the construction on the house could start before we were here, and we realized that we had to be here while it was going on. And I moved back to North Carolina in October of 2005, and we moved into this house in September of 2006. So that took a lot of time and effort, but I had been docent twice in art museums, the North Carolina Museum of Art in Raleigh, and then the Chrysler Museum in Norfolk. But I didn't want to do that again. I enjoyed it, so I was kind of a little bit at loose ends. But Gail Warren and I had gone as a treat to ourselves to a spa in it's actually in Mexico, Rancho La Porta, and it's really designed for exercise and healthy living. And I took a yoga class, and I loved it. So I joined the Y, and I go 3 days a week and walk on their indoor track, so I don't have to worry about stepping in a hole or meeting the neighborhood bear.
Or a snake.
Or a snake. Snake's really what I worry more about. The bears are...
I know they're around.
They're around, definitely. So I did that, and Frank had convinced me to write a column for Law Library Journal because I had written one for a state court and county newsletter. He read it and said, "Oh, will you do this for a broader audience?" So I did Managing by the Book, and I did it for 5 years. Val had an agreement with the Virginia Lawyer magazine that they would have a column written by law librarians for attorneys on legal research topics. And so I was the editor and solicited the articles and did that for a couple of years. I did taught the law librarianship class for Penny Hazel for 2 years.
Done that 2 years.
And then Evelyn Campbell, who does the Val blog, convinced me to write a series of 4 articles about life and retirement. And that was really fun. How to prepare for it, what are the issues, kind of things to think about as you're planning to retire, and then what it's like once you do. I continued doing programs at the annual meeting for several years, and I did chapter programs on management or access to technology or
I suppose
whatever.
it kind of comes back to the fact that now in retirement you're sort of a consultant on the subject of law libraries.
I thought I might actually, develop it into a business, but it sounded good, but there were too many other things I wanted to do.
That's too much like working, too.
Exactly. It was too much like work. And I've had fun. I have friends who will call, and they know, they can talk to me, and I'm not going to... Who in the world out here would I tell their story to? They know they can trust me, and I enjoy doing that, but I don't go out and solicit, and I would... I enjoy what I'm doing.
Sounds like you have quite a few activities.
Well,
now, there's one you haven't mentioned, and I'm inviting you to mention it, if you will.
Food, and
the painting.
Oh, the painting, yeah.
Because I saw some benefits of both those efforts, and they're nice.
When you live out in the middle of nowhere, and the roads are curvy, and the deer like to share your roads at night, and
say nothing of those bears.
Yes, there are lots of great restaurants in Winston-Salem, but if we want a nice meal, we'll go during the day. And so if I wanted a nice dinner, I was going to have to up my game. So my daughter and I went for 3 years to the John C. Campbell Folk School, which is kind of renowned in our area. It was started by some do-gooders from New England in the 1920s to preserve mountain crafts, and now they do every craft you can imagine, but they also do modern things like cooking. So we took some pretty amazing...
Well, I guess you do qualify as sort of a semi-mountainous area. The
It
Blue
is.
Ridge are right nearby.
They
In fact,
are.
you can see them from the windows
You can.
upstairs before it got dark.
Yes, before it got dark. So definitely food and cooking, and it's something I can share with other people. And
You shared it with me tonight, you and Paul.
We
I
did.
thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, I'm glad. My family's gotten interested, and there were sharing recipes and having big cooking events. I also was talked into taking a watercolor class. Gail Warren, who is really an accomplished painter.
Sounds like Gail is a bit of an influence
She
on you
is.
on
We're good
occasion,
friends.
of the right sort.
Yes, we're very good friends. And so we have gone 2 years to take watercolor classes, and I put up a card table in my front door because nobody ever uses the front door, and my goal was to make Christmas cards, and I didn't get it done this year, but I'm going to start. Winter is really more practical for me because we have 36 acres, and I have a husband with a green thumb, and he's always planting things, and then they need to be watered. So I have literally a little red wagon, and I have the plastic orange juice containers. We capture the rain off the roof in big horse tanks, and so he plants and I water, and it's good exercise. And I have flowers, and we have fruit of every variety. So
Yeah, well, as you say, you have 36 acres, and you've got fruit trees all over
We
down
do.
towards the entrance, and
yep, we do.
blueberries and some other things you
We have
mentioned.
raspberries, blackberries,
Yeah.
blueberries.
You keep telling me all this, and I put it on this video, and everyone will come sneaking in here and
Yay.
stealing your
Well, we want
your
people
produce.
to come. No, we want people to come. That's a part of why we built a house like this, so people would visit, and they have, which is nice.
Yeah, it's nice. I've obviously been invited to stay the night, and it's a bit of a palace out here
It's fun.
in the country. Yeah, it's very nice. Well, it sounds like you more than just keep casually busy. What happened every day was Saturday. You seem to have reinvented Friday through Monday.
That was hard. That was one of the things that was the hardest, to give myself a day off.
Yeah.
Because especially,
Well, as you
there's so
say,
much
you've
to
been
do.
working all your adult life, and really even some of your growing up life, and it's perhaps a little hard to just sort of stop cold turkey. And
right?
I think a few projects are probably good for
Yes. Yep.
one. At least when one's health is
Yes.
such that you can do this.
Yeah.
Well, you've done a lot, as we already have talked about, some of your professional activities as well, and you've been recognized formally with some fairly prestigious awards for your work. In 2006, the government law libraries, I guess that's the new name.
It
Yeah,
is.
that's why I'm sort of stumbling
I know,
over it,
me
and I
too.
wrote it out here too. They have an award, their highest award, which is Bethany J. Okel Award for Distinguished Service.
Yes.
And you got that, you were given that in 2006 for all of your various and sundry service to the Special Interest Section. And then 2 years later, you got the Connie E. Bolden Publications Award for your managing by the book series that was in the Law Library Journal for 5 or 6 years, you said. And then also, sort of out of the blue, you mentioned off camera, you found out you were going to be given, and this was in 2004, the AELL Spectrum Article of the Year Award for an article that you wrote about the King County Law Library's annual report, and you're using it to sort of become an underused opportunity. You made it a used opportunity to tell the library's story, sort of to the broader community.
Yes.
So you've had some formal recognition
Yes.
and some pretty prestigious formal
Wow.
recognition of a lot of the stuff you did over the years. thinking you needed to do it for other reasons.
Yes, have no idea that, that they existed, which is kind of fun.
Yeah. Well, I remember because, of course, Bethany is somebody I'd love to interview, but she happens to be residing in Hawaii, and I haven't figured out if I can swim that far yet
Yeah,
to do it.
well,
But maybe
just
I
make
will.
your list. There are several people there that.
That's right. And maybe it'll be a good excuse to
Yeah.
be traveling. And of course, Connie is not only a friend of all of us, but he lives right across town from
Yeah.
where I live in Olympia,
Yeah.
out there near Seattle now. So these awards are named after people of their own, the highest
Yes.
level of achievement in our
Yes.
profession. Yeah. Well, Jean, we're sort of probably nearing the end of our
Right.
conversation this evening. But before we do, it's customary to ask if there's anything we
Yes.
haven't talked about that you would like to bring up. And to give you fair warning, not everybody does have
Yeah.
anything.
I'll tell you, when I graduated from law school,
Mhm.
I got a card from my parents, and it showed a suitably cap and gown figure and this diploma falling from the sky. And you open it up, and what it said is, "Thank God." And I think, thank God that I found something that I cared so much for,
Mhm.
that I enjoyed, that really made my mind work the way it never had before.
Mhm.
And the bonus was all the wonderful people that helped me
Yeah.
and that are friends today.
You know, in a way, and I've heard this put this way quite formally on several of these interviews, we were always in competition with each other in that we managed or worked in libraries that were in some way evaluated vis-a-vis each other by at least some people, I guess. But we never did it in an inappropriate way. We were colleagues and friends and supportive. And it's the supportive aspect that I think you're alluding to in
Right.
what you just said.
Fun
Yeah.
times.
Good people
Yeah.
and good times. In a wonderful way, at least in my years I was part of it, to earn a living.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, maybe with that said, Gina and Holcomb, I ought to thank you for taking time this evening to talk with me here on camera. And in thanking you, I'm doing it not just on my own behalf. After all, I had the fun of coming here and seeing you and Paul and partaking of a nice meal and hospitality for the night. But I'm also thanking you on behalf of Michelle Wu, Frank Odek, and Dick Spinelli, with whom I have the honor of working to put together this oral history of law librarianship for the Hein Online Spinelli's Law Library Reference Shelf section. Thank you.